We're so happy you're here with us. I believe we have everyone just about. We're still waiting for a few people who will be added. So in the meantime, let's begin. Bismillah. My name is Edward Ahmed Mitchell. I'm the National Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our event, The Nonprofit Killer Bill and You, How to Protect Your Nonprofits in 2025 and Beyond. CAIR is hosting this event with LaunchGood. We're going to tell you a bit about both organizations in just a moment. I want to turn it over to my co-host tonight, Chris, who will introduce himself. Brother Chris, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much, brother Edward. My name is Chris Abdurrahman Blavat. I'm the CEO and founder of LaunchGood. I've had the pleasure of meeting, I think, a number of you. And, is this would you say this is the time to share our slides?
Please, go ahead, Chris. Yeah, you go first.
Just let me do that here. And we're really not here to listen to me, so I'm going to go through this rather quickly, inshallah.
That's fine.
But just in case people don't know as much or aren't as familiar, I did want to talk a little bit about LaunchGood. I'm the CEO, as I mentioned. I also have two other co-founders, Amani Kalawi and Omar Hamid. Amani originally from Detroit in Virginia now, so if you guys are in that area, you might run across her around the Adams Center. And Omar is actually in Australia. And we started this in 2015. Alhamdulillah, we're still together. Actually, we started in 2013. This is a picture from 2015, but we're still together a decade later. And LaunchGood has grown a lot. It's the world's largest crowdfunding platform to the global Muslim community. You can think of it as a Muslim GoFundMe. Mashallah, over the years, we've had now almost $1 billion donated. It's crazy to think about. I remember when we thought it was a really big deal, we got to $10 million. But mashallah, we're blessed to have facilitated a lot of fundraising. But as they say, more money, more problems. And one of the things that we've learned about in this journey of ours is what a challenge Muslim nonprofits face in the banking industry. We almost died ourselves 3 times. So some of you, this may not be such a surprise. You experienced it yourself. We got kicked off Stripe. We got kicked off WePay, Blue Snap, Chase Bank. I could go on and on. Unfortunately, like just 3 in the last 12 months, 3 more that I haven't even mentioned right now. And we identified this problem as banking while Muslim. At first, we thought it was just us. And then we started realizing that this is affecting Islamic Relief and all sorts of different charities. And we actually partnered with Islamic Relief to run a study with the ISPU to see exactly how prevalent this problem was. Turns out it's a massive problem. Over half of Muslim charities have faced debanking, 64% or so. And it's become so disruptive to the good work that we're trying to do. So we have some articles that, I'm not going to bore you guys here with it now, but there's a really good one called Banking as American Muslim. It's a horror. Even recently, we were featured alongside Melania Trump, which is a weird person to be sharing the limelight with. But yeah, debanking has a moment right now. And when we saw this nonprofit bill that the nonprofit killer bill that Congress has been trying to push through, it's like debanking on steroids or banking while Muslim on steroids. It's very scary. It doesn't directly affect us because we are not a nonprofit. However, all of our, majority of our clients are nonprofits. And it could threaten the good work that all of you do. And I noticed Brother Edward and CAIR have been really leading in this. And we asked them, would they be so kind to do a webinar and help us understand, help you understand, and help us be prepared as a community to face the challenges ahead. There will be challenges, no doubt about it. But before it gets all, doom and gloom, we have a fun little Kahoot. Is this the right time to do the Kahoot, Edward?
Not quite.
Not
So
yet. Okay,
I'll
we're
take it
going to
back here,
save
Chris.
that.
So yeah. So thanks, Chris, for your work and for being willing to work with us on this. For those of you who don't know, CAIR and LaunchGood obviously do 2 completely different areas of work, right? CAIR's a civil rights group, and I'll tell you about us in a moment. But we both recognize that our community is concerned. Nonprofit organizations, whether it's a mosque or a charity or a civil rights group, are the backbone of our community. And in many ways, they are kind of the heart and soul of our country. They are the ones who are always pushing to change things for the better, sometimes for the worse, depending on their mission. And so when you have a new president come into power, when he is surrounded by people who have made dangerous remarks about the future nonprofits, I think Launch could recognize and CAIR recognize we wanted to make sure we connect with our community and our friends and allies and neighbors to, number one, educate you all about what are the potential threats to nonprofits in 2025 and beyond. Number two, about the nonprofit bill in particular. Number three, about the other things that we should all be doing to keep ourselves safe, to make sure our nonprofits are dotting their I's and crossing their T's so they are safe from any sort of abuse from the government. So you all hopefully know a bit about CAIR, but I'll just share a bit about us briefly. CAIR, as you all may know, our nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. We were founded way back in 1994 by Brother Nihad Awad and Ibrahim Hooper and Omar Ahmed. Our mission is very simple. It's to enhance the public's understanding of Islam. Our theory being that education is a very good vaccine against discrimination. Hard to hate Muslims when you know a bit about us. To protect the civil rights of not only American Muslims, but all Americans so that we can freely and fearlessly practice our faith. To promote justice, not just for Muslims, but for all people here and abroad. And to empower American Muslims to train and uplift the next generation so they can fight the battles of tomorrow and advance justice for this country and others in the future. And so that's what we've been doing for the past 30 years. Alhamdulillah, this past June was our 30th anniversary. We started with one office on K Street. We now have, alhamdulillah, almost 30 chapters and offices across the country, 500 staff, board, and volunteers. And we so appreciate the support of the community that has allowed us to do this work. And a big part of our work, as you all know, is standing up to the government and protecting you, our community, from government abuses. And so, again, that's why we're here tonight, to make sure not only that you know what's coming potentially down the pipeline, but to make sure you're not panicking, that you know what the risks are, what they are not, and that you are making sure your nonprofits, again, whether it's a charity, a mosque, or anything else, is in order so that no one can easily come after you and disrupt the work that you want to do. So you're going to hear tonight from some government affairs experts and attorneys who are going to run you through what you need to know, inshallah. This is some of our CAIR team here. You'll see some of them tonight. Tanya Clevenger, our COO, Lena Masri, our General Counsel and Litigation Director, and Robert McCarr, Government Affairs Director. You'll also hear from Brother Nihad, our Executive Director, in just a moment. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris, because tonight's going to be a little interactive. We're not just going to talk you through a screen. We're going to check right now to see how much you already know about the nonprofit issues we're going to be discussing today. Chris is going to run you through a brief little pre-quiz. If you all are able to, go ahead and take that quiz now. He's going to walk you through it. And then at the end of the presentations, you're going to go through it one more time. We're going to see how much your knowledge increased, inshallah. So Chris, I'm going to turn it back to you for that, and then we'll get to our speakers.
Excellent. So this might seem silly if you never heard of Kahoot. It looks like something you use in the classroom. It actually is. It's for teachers, but it's become our secret, super successful business tool at LaunchGood. We always try to start our meetings with a Kahoot, and it makes it, one, fun. Two, you're probably going to get a lot of questions wrong, which will help you pay attention. And three, as hosts, it gives us a really good idea of which areas do we need to focus on during this presentation. So let's get started. Let's raise the energy in the room, inshallah. You'll see we are sharing our screen here. And all you have to do is go to this site, kahoot.it, and put in that PIN number. So KAHOOT.IT. And then the PIN is going to be 712-4212. All right, a lot of people join. And we'll go through this pretty quick. I'd say take about 5 minutes. I'm going to pass it to my Chief of Staff, Miriam, to make it fun and interactive for us, inshallah. Miriam is with us here in the US, although she's originally from the UK, mashallah, studied and grew up there, went to Qatar, came to New York, and is now in Orlando. So she's a woman of the world, mashallah.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everyone. This is great. I'm seeing the numbers
Wow.
creeping in. You'll notice the music is extra spooky because it's the non-profit killer bill. So we've gone for the killer
Oh,
theme
clever.
just to make it extra fun. I try. Welcome, everyone. So the pin is on the screen. I'll give a few moments for people to join. We have about 200 participants and just about over half of that. But I don't want us to take too long. So I'm going to start a very slow countdown from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Thank you, David, for posting the link in case anyone needs it. I think I was on 7. Let's go 6, 5, 4, 3. Last chance to join. Last couple of people. 2, and 1. Bismillah. Let's get started. So remember, speed and accuracy matter. Okie doke. First question. Which House resolution is known as the non-profit killer bill? Is it HR 9495, HR 6408? Is it both of the above, or is it HR 1322? All right.
Right.
Okay. Interestingly enough, it is both A and B, according to our research. CAIR will correct us if that's wrong, but I hope that's right.
That is correct, Mary. You're okay.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So a common misconception. We will find out more. Good job for those who got it right. Sorry, Chris. Maybe next. Still time to recover. All right. The leaderboards. I don't know who these people are, but you will reveal yourselves when the podium comes, surely. Question number 2. True or false? This bill creates entirely new powers that did not exist under previous legislation. Is this true or is this false? Oh, look at those speedy answers. They're getting the hang of it, I can see. Something like a bit of healthy competition to get our brains working. Interesting. So this is in fact false, and the CAIR team will also tell us more about this as we go through today's presentation.
This is going terrible for me.
Good shake up on the leaderboard there. I'm just going to move this little panel thing. Okay, there we go. All right, well done, Alina. Nice climb there. All right, question number 3. What was the rebranded name of HR 9495 introduced in September 2024? Was it the Nonprofit Terrorism Prevention Act? Was it the Protect Civil Society Act? The Enhanced Nonprofit Oversight Act? Or, I just got a call, forgive me, the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act? It's a mouthful.
I just want to commend you for putting this together because all those names could potentially be a congressional bill.
Oh, thank you. I tried. All right. It is in fact option number 4. I won't put you through listening to me reading it out again. How are we doing on the leaderboards? Okay, H has climbed to the top. Hopefully you're also learning too and seeing how learning can be fun. Which House committee demanded suspicious activity reports, SARS, from Palestinian rights groups? Was it the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the House Education and Workforce Committee, or the Judiciary Committee? Which one is it? Who knows? This is indeed answer number 1. How the leaderboard's looking. Wow, big shake up. Adina's back fighting for that first position. Well done, H. All right. Question number 5. What is the main concern about the nonprofit killer bill? Does it complicate nonprofit regulations? Is it that it allows the Treasury to revoke tax-exempt status without solid evidence? Is it that it is going to reduce funding for nonprofits, or does it increase the requirements for donor transparency? Good job. Well done, team. That is, in fact, one of the main concerns, if not the main concern. Most people got that right. Great stuff. Okay, which of these is not one of CAIR's top concerns about the bill? Is it heightened risk of discrimination? Is it increased operational costs? Is it the erosion of due process or the weaponization of anti-terror laws? Speedy Gonzalez over here.
Good question.
Okay, indeed, that is not
Almost got that right.
CAIR's main concerns. Yeah, good job. Almost got it right. All right, speed through over here. Which term is broadly defined under the proposed legislation to include training, services, and grants? Is it nonprofit activities, advocacy efforts, material support for terrorism, or philanthropic donations? Indeed. All of those will come under the broad definition of material support for terrorism, which we will learn more about today. Oh, wow. That was a completely divorced shakeup. Interesting times. All right, true or false? HR 9495 empowers the Secretary of the Treasury to revoke tax-exempt status based on classified information. Is this true
Wow.
or is this?
You were fast.
Okay, most got that right indeed. Classified information, sometimes not even solid evidence, just a suspicion at times, but we
Crazy.
will learn more about that. Hard times. All right. How long does a nonprofit have to respond after receiving notice of potential tax-exempt revocation? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or 120 days? Okay, it's a good one to keep a note of. It is indeed 90 days. Good work, SD. Last couple of questions. A nonprofit accused of providing material support to a foreign entity has its tax-exempt status revoked. What is the next step for that nonprofit? Do they appeal to the IRS Independent Office of Appeals? Do they cease operations immediately? Do they file a civil suit against the Treasury? Or do they request an exemption from Congress? Great. Most of you got that one right. That is indeed the next course of action. How's it looking? Right.
Imagine having your life depend on Congress.
Yes. Last two questions. Which of these organizational documents should nonprofits ensure are kept up to date? Select all that apply. So this is a multi-select question. Is it the Articles of Incorporation, the bylaws, IRS determination letter, or Form 990? Remember, there is more than one correct answer, so select all that apply. Good work. Most people guessed that or answered correctly that all of those are good practices for you to keep up to date. All right, this is the last question. Is it double points? It is indeed for double points. In it to win it. What is one key strategy for nonprofits to protect themselves against legislation like the Nonprofit Killer Bill? You avoid international collaborations, build coalitions and raise public awareness, seize advocacy activities, or shift to for-profit models. Good job.
Nice. Everyone got that pretty
Yeah.
much.
That's a good one for everyone to get right. That's why we're all here. Alhamdulillah. All right. So top three. F, congratulations in third place. Romana, great work. Second place. Narrowly taking the top spot is Tanvir. Well done. Well done, well done, well done. All right, that is all from me and from Kahoot. Back to you, Edward.
Great job, man. Thank you so much.
Of
Alhamdulillah.
course.
Thank you, Miriam. That was awesome. And alhamdulillah, people seem to know a lot, and also things that we maybe thought we knew, but we didn't know. So again, we're going to dive in now, and we're going to walk through some of the issues you just heard about and other issues that weren't covered. And again, we'll test you again at the end to see if all of this is now sticking a little better, inshallah. So to proceed, we're going to just give you the lay of the evening. First, we're going to hear brief introductory remarks from the CAIR National Executive Director and co-founder, Nihad Awad, who's going to talk to you about why nonprofit organizations are being threatened in this day and age. And it's because that we're doing good work, and he's going to talk to you about that. You're then going to hear from our Government Affairs Director, Robert McCaw. Chris and I are going to interview him, and he's going to talk about the nonprofit killer bill in detail, what it does and what it doesn't do and what its current status is. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there about it. So we want to clear the air about the nonprofit killer bill. Then after that, you're going to hear from Lena and Tanya, our COO and our General Counsel and Litigation Director. They're going to walk you through the other common risks and vulnerabilities facing nonprofit organizations and what you all should be doing to make sure you are compliant with the law so the government cannot come after you because of some mistake that you may have inadvertently made, inshallah. And then we're going to wrap up with a quiz again and then Q&A. As we're going through the program, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. If our panelists see your questions, see something they want to answer right then, they will pause and do that. But if they don't, we will make time at the end to take questions and try to answer as many questions as we can, inshallah. And of course, CAIR, LaunchGood, the people here will make ourselves available to communicate with you after this program and your organization. There's something in particular we might be able to address with you, inshallah. So all that being said, let me invite on CAIR National Executive Director Nihad Awad to do some level setting for us as we begin the program. Brother Nihad.
Thank you, Edward. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm honored to join our co-panelists and LaunchGood, Brother Chris and their team. MashaAllah, I didn't realize that games can be tools to raise awareness. And just to delve into it quickly, I'm going to start with the last question. What does it mean and why is this taking place and what should be our response? So it is important to understand the context of this potential law, which is in the form of legislation now, to basically silence nonprofit organizations and activists who have risen their voices and have shown that they are effective. And we are concerned that the government or some government agencies or some politicians may use their power, which is seen as an abuse of power, to silence debate, to prevent people from their constitutional right to express themselves and to be active, civically active. And you can notice that the timing is crucial. The community in the past year specifically, and the pro-Palestine community of activists and organizations, the diverse voices from the Muslim community, the Jewish community, the Christian community, and other communities in the United States and around the world have created a movement to say no to genocide. And this anti-genocide movement really has had great impact and caused the tide to turn. And we see it in the United States. The public opinion has shifted dramatically towards justice for Palestinians and putting limitations and restrictions on foreign military aid to the state of Israel when American families struggle to feed their children and their members, when our infrastructure is deteriorating, when wildfires in LA cannot be controlled, not because there are no courageous firefighters, but they do not have the resources. And diverting essential American resources and tax dollars from taxpayers is really a betrayal to the trust that we as Americans have put into our government. So in short, the pro-Palestine movement has created a great shift in the narrative and has been effective. So to silence it, they need some intimidating tactics. The philanthropy, as Brother Kiss noted, has grown tremendously. American Muslims and the general public have shown their generosity to stand by the people who need our help. So, what is our response to this is key. It is important to understand, as we have seen and we will see in a few moments, where the bill is and why you should be engaged in pushing back against this bill. It might become law, but even if it becomes law and it's enforced on organizations unjustly, we have to have our collective power to speak out, as we have been speaking out against the genocide and those who support it. The impact that we can have is tremendous. So I'm really, personally, I'm very optimistic that our collective effort will protect innocent individuals and nonprofit organizations. Secondly, our response should be not to retreat, not to be scared, not to be intimidated, but to double up our activism, our advocacy, our philanthropy, our civic engagement, especially in 2025 and moving forward. There are many questions about the incoming administration, how it will enforce any of these policies, and how they will crack down on pro-Palestine organizations and individuals. This is yet to be seen, but also we have seen what this incoming president might be doing. There is also one twist to it. Many American Muslims and Arab Americans have voted for him. I hope that this will be taken into consideration as he considers policies that will impact Muslims and Arabs, the Middle East, and the Muslim world. We should not be too optimistic, but also, hopefully, this is an encouragement for him and his administration to be mindful. Finally, we're not going to be silent when we see crackdown on the immigrant communities, the communities of color. We as Muslims should not be greedy or selfish. We only show our activism and support only when it affects our community. But every community that will be touched by any injustice, it is really an injustice against us, and we have to work together. So, to conclude, as we are going to delve into the legislation, where it is, legal advice from our legal counsel and COO, you should know that CAIR is for you. Be engaged with CAIR and support CAIR, and be aware of what CAIR services are. The legal services of CAIR are free of charge. And alhamdulillah, the community has grown and CAIR has grown. And last thing I would say, we all witness the growth and impact of the Muslim community. The ecosystem of CAIR itself grew into C4 organization. We have a lobbying organization. We have a political action committee, PAC, and we have Super PAC. And this is just around CAIR. So let's put our hands together and amplify the American Muslim civic, political, and nonprofit voices. So I look forward to the presentation from our experts, and I'll sit back and watch and learn like all of you.
Thank you, Brother Nihad, for those remarks and that perspective. Brother Nihad has been doing this for a very long time. He has seen numerous presidential administrations come and go. He's seen some good ones, seen some ones that tried to do some harm. But the fact is that the March for Justice still continues. The nonprofits doing great work. Most of them are still here, and inshallah, God willing, will continue to be here. And that's what this is about tonight, is learning how we can make sure we can keep doing our work. So, Chris, now we're going to get right into the meat of things, the business of things. So I know you struggled with that quiz. I missed a few myself. So you and I both are going to do some learning, inshallah. We're going to bring on now CAIR's Government Affairs Director, Robert McCaw, and he's going to walk us through the nonprofit killer bill, what it is, what it isn't, why we're concerned about it. We want to just make sure everyone understands what it is. It's not something you need to panic over, but it's also something that you need to be aware of and we want to push back against. And again, tonight is not just about that bill. We're also going to talk about the other potential risks and vulnerabilities that nonprofits face, the common mistakes that nonprofits might make that can make them vulnerable to a bad actor in the government. So after Robert, we're going to go into other issues with Tani and Lena, our general counsel and COO. And so please make sure you stay on for that. So Robert, if you can turn your camera on, we're going to bring you on and dive right into the conversation about the nonprofit killer bill, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi Robert. Okay, Hamza, the floor is yours. Go ahead and start us off, Robert, and we'll ask some questions as you go, inshallah. But go ahead and start us off with the basics about what this bill is.
Great. And should I be sharing the presentation or is someone doing that?
You can do that if you got it ready.
Yep, I
If
got
not,
it
let
ready.
me know and I can share it.
Hold on 1 second. I have to pull it up again. Sorry, I thought there was someone coordinating.
No, it's okay. I can do it for you, Robert.
Okay, great. Well, then, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Again, my name is Robert McCom, CAIR's Government Affairs Director. I've been working on this bill for over a year. And last year in the United States Congress, a series of legislative measures were proposed, not passed and adopted by the president to law, and they were collectively referred to by CAIR as the Nonprofit Killer Bill. Now, these bills, HR 6408, HR 9495, and in the Senate, S 4136, they pose a significant threat to the sustainability and operations of nonprofit organizations. And at its core, this bill, in its different forms, it empowers a single executive official, the Secretary of Treasury, to unilaterally revoke the tax-exempt status of any nonprofit organization in the United States suspected of providing material support to terrorism. Now, under federal law, material support or resources is defined expansively, and it includes tangible and intangible assets and can even cover grants, trainings, services. And a lot of critics, including CAIR, warn that such a wide net could inadvertently sweep legitimate civil society and advocacy organizations, especially those that are speaking out on critical and sometimes to our opponents controversial issues like the US's foreign policy or Israel's genocide in Gaza. And the bill sponsors themselves, they say that material support, including these financial services trainings, that it's just really anything that advances the objectives of a terrorist organization. And that's why you see members of Congress right now calling student protesters common criminals, terrorist-loving kids, terrorist sympathizers. And in the end, this legislation, we'll get into it later, it's all designed to chill dissent and peaceful advocacy. We can kind of jump more into that as we go through.
Absolutely. So, Robert, thank you for that basic rundown of the bill. So, tell us a little more in detail, how does this law work? Because there are already laws in the books that address material support for terrorism, right? Which is illegal. No one should be doing that. Those laws already exist. So how does this law work? How does this law empower the Treasury Department to more easily target an organization in a potentially baseless way?
Sure. So normally, under a lot of the laws that we have, the Department of Justice would charge an organization, offices raided, people arrested, trials, et cetera, et cetera. This skips all of that and turns into a very bureaucratic process where a single executive authority, again, the Secretary of Treasury, would be granted the powers to revoke nonprofit tax status if they deem a nonprofit organization as being a quote-unquote terrorist supporting organization engaging in material support. So what they would initially do is put together whatever evidence, or in some cases, we believe just in bad faith accusations if the office is politicized, and they would trigger this law and they would issue a 90-day notice to the nonprofit. It would get sent to the official mailing address as registered with the IRS, and it would provide its reasoning if it's not classified on what the government is accusing it of doing for material support. An organization would have to rebut that within 90 days and also certify that they would not engage in any further activities that they're being claimed to do. Now, these, just for details, these are activities that took place within the last 3 years. Within this 90-day period, an organization can appeal directly to Treasury. When the Secretary of Treasury invokes this law, that doesn't mean your status is immediately revoked. It just means you have 90 days in a very bureaucratic sense to challenge with the Department of Treasury these allegations, accusations, or to provide your remedy on how it was accidental and you wouldn't do it again.
So, Robert, what's fascinating about that is that it almost inverts the way the justice system is supposed to work. Normally, if the government thinks you did something wrong, they file a criminal charge against you, and then they have to prove that you did something wrong. Under this inverted system, the Treasury Department is saying, well, we are going to humiliate you. We're going to threaten to take away your tax status. And if you don't want us to do that, you have to prove that you didn't do anything wrong, right? And so it's almost an inversion of the normal way that due process is supposed to work, right? If you think I did something wrong, prove it. I was a prosecutor back in the day, and I could never go into court and just say, hey, judge, I think this person did something wrong. Let them prove I'm telling that I'm wrong. No, I had to go and prove that someone did something wrong. That is the way America is supposed to work in theory. And this bill inverts that. Now, Robert, let's go ahead, Robert.
Oh, and if this accusation is made against you, it's not like the Secretary of Treasury or the Treasury Department is going to be penalized for making a wrong accusation, but one wrong accusation or one in bad faith accusation could ruin your reputation and cause untold damage for an organization.
Right. And again, that's kind of the goal that some of the sponsors have indicated, right? Is that even if they know that what they're selling isn't true, the mere accusation is enough to send donors running for the hills, right? To banks to start shutting down accounts. Chris, and LaunchGood are an excellent organization, squeaky cleaning it. Even they've been targeted because they're a Muslim organization. And so again, imagine if the Treasury Department says, we are accusing X, Y, and Z organization of support for terrorism, and they've got to prove they didn't do it. What is that going to do to their donor base? What's that going to do to the banks that are hosting them, right? So the bill itself, again, the organizations, we all know, are not doing anything wrong, right? No one here is doing anything wrong that would warrant legal action. But the government, under a bad actor, all they would really want to do is try to drain your resources, destroy your reputation, and thereby make it impossible for your organization to function. That's why it's so important this power not be created. Even if it's never used at all, you don't want this sword of injustice hanging over any organization. So, Robert,
Sure.
let's go ahead.
No, let's get to the next slide because I can kind of show some qualms and quibbles about this whole appeals process too.
Yeah. So they have an appeals process now. They understood that they were going to, this bill would not even stand muster in a court if you didn't have some way for a person to contest it. So what did they come up with to give you a chance to try to contest a frivolous allegation?
So after the 90-day period, if they don't take your arguments and you lose, it goes to the IRS. And there is an arbitration process also with them where you can do that administratively a second time. Now, should that fail, your only way of appealing this would be to seek a final determination in court. You would go to a federal circuit court. And one of my biggest problems with this law, and it's written in the law, is that classified evidence would be used. And CAIR, we have a history of challenging government designations with the watch list where they use classified evidence and you cannot challenge that evidence. And so it can make it extremely difficult for a nonprofit to prove they didn't do something if they don't even know what the accusation is, which is a complete lack of due process. And what we see in a number of material support cases, quite often they do rely on classified evidence.
Robert, we've got some questions in the chat. I think some of them are clear. So one of the questions was, is your tax status automatically revoked when they make the accusation? And as you noted, that's not the case. There is that 90-day period before the revocation occurs. Another question was, would your bank access and bank funds automatically be revoked? Would they be locked? Would you be locked out of your bank accounts the moment a revocation is issued? And my understanding is no, that is up to the bank. That's a separate issue. Now, the bank, if they hear about this, might decide they're afraid and they want to shut down your accounts. That could happen, but this process doesn't require the bank to do that. Correct, Robert?
Yes, and I would clarify again, this is why this bill is so insidious. These are not criminal charges. This is a bureaucratic designation to remove your tax status where someone in the government makes a claim against you, but they never really have to take it to court, and they can hide behind secret evidence. And so again, I would think in the hands of a bad actor, you wouldn't want this to go to court because there's such a high threshold, usually, that the government would have to prove in court for why they were making such a designation. And also, immediately, if an organization was criminally charged with providing material support, then yes, their assets are frozen. Everything's on lockdown. But that's not the case. This is just really to cause you the biggest financial headache of a lifetime.
Yeah. And now the thing that does result in your bank accounts being seized is if the normal process, which is criminal charges, like the government, the FBI says you've done something illegal and they pursue that, is when bank accounts end up getting seized and all that forcibly. But this process does not result in an automatic incident like that. Let's see. Okay, another question, Robert, before we keep going is, what nonprofits are at risk of scrutiny? All kinds of Muslim-owned nonprofits, only the ones sending aid to Palestine or Muslim countries. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later when we get to the compliance. But in general, this bill doesn't single out or mention Palestine or Muslim or anything. It's wide ranging. So technically it could apply to the ACLU, to Habitat for Humanity, to anyone, right? But in practice, we all know who they really want to go after, right? What is motivating this bill is hostility towards activism for Palestinian human rights. Okay, so we'll take a few more questions in a bit, but let me keep you going, Robert, with your presentation. So the origins of the bill.
I'll try to be quick for the next slides.
Yes, okay. So the origin of the bill,
right.
There's been some background to this. Just give us a little background. And please note, this is getting some bipartisan support historically, correct?
It did. In fact, the first iteration of this bill, which did pass Congress, H.R. 6408, which was introduced by 2 Republicans, it was passed in the House in April 15th, very quietly. Not too many organizations were really tracking this. And it passed by 382 to 11, with just 37 offices abstaining, mostly Democratic. But again, this was strongly passed by Republicans and Democrats. Only after it passed was there so much coverage in it and the attention of groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, the ACLU, other organizations, that we were able to convince the Senate not to move forward with this bill as a provision in a Federal Aviation Act spending bill. That's where we really stalled it, and it hadn't moved in the Senate since then. There was a secondary attempt to again pass this through. It was added as a provision to a bill that would prevent taxes on hostages overseas that were Americans. It was called the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act. And, this involved an incredible education campaign. And the initial vote for it, 219 members of Congress, including a number of Democrats, support it. But at this point, 184 opposed it. It was a 2/3 majority vote. It couldn't pass. A week later, it did pass under a week later, I got them wrong on my timeline. Sorry. Initially, it failed a 2/3 majority vote, 256 to 145. A week later, after an intense education campaign, that dropped down to 219 to 184. When you look at it from when the bill first passed in its first iteration, with 382 supporters down to 219, that's basically how many Democrats we were able to peel off this bill.
Yeah, and that's an important note that initially what they did was the members of Republicans and pro-Israel Democrats, they combined this bill with that tax bill about waiving your 2024 taxes for Israelis being held hostage in Gaza. So they put that bill together with this bill, hoping to get it through. And initially people were, oh yeah, this is fine, we'll support it. But thanks to the work of CAIR, the ACLU, and others who educated members of Congress about the dangers of this bill, it ended up being an almost partisan vote when it eventually passed. Overwhelmingly Republicans voted for it. Most Democrats voted against it. And so again, and the Senate right now is not letting it get through. Now under this new Senate, we'll see what happens. They're going to have to, I think, hit that 2/3 majority to get past the filibuster, which is hopefully, God willing, unlikely. But again, education is key to make sure our members of Congress know. You might look at this at a glance and go, oh, what's the big deal? But once you know the motivation of it, once you know how much this inverts the normal process for justice, that's when you have some issues. We're continuing to answer some questions in the chat. So if you posted a question in the chat, some of them we're answering verbally, some we're just typing the answer to. So keep track of your answer there. So Robert, let's wrap up now with, what is concerning about this bill? If someone is speaking to their member of Congress trying to explain why this bill is a problem, what are the concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So our number one concern is that this bill by design is to chill the First Amendment rights. Material support can be overbroadly interpreted by the government. And we really believe this is designed in the current political climate to silence critics of Israel as terrorist sympathizers, but then actually see an executive office holder implement that in the form of a nonprofit tax revocation. We also are concerned about heightened discrimination. Again, while a law like this could apply to anyone historically, for the past 24 years, we've seen that Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, Persian, nonprofits, organizations, individuals have been disproportionately scrutinized by the national security state, quite often for viewpoint discrimination, especially by really every administration. They've been hostile. Again, we're concerned about due process erosion, where any organization could be having their nonprofit tax status revoked based on classified evidence, and that's evidence you cannot challenge. That is at the crux of every CAIR watch list litigation, and so this is really it leaves nonprofits in a position where they're guilty until proven innocent, but they can't prove they're innocent because they don't know the charges against them. Again, we're concerned about the weaponization of anti-terror laws being turned against critics of Israel and of U.S. foreign policy. And really, one of the greatest impacts, number 5 could actually be number 1. It's curtailing the community services and the advocacy of organizations. This sets a very dangerous precedent, and it could hurt some organizations that would want to speak out, use their First Amendment rights to speak freely, to assemble, to petition the government. Maybe they'll want to take a backseat because they don't want to get the attention of a McCarthyistic investigation.
Absolutely. Okay, Robert, there is much more we could say about this bill, but we're going to pause now because this bill is not the only potential risk or vulnerability out there. So we want to discuss those other issues. But in wrapping up here, what I want to emphasize is that this bill is not a law yet. It does not exist yet. There is still an opportunity to push back against it, either to stop it altogether or at least get it significantly overhauled. And that is going to require all of us to raise our voices in the Senate. This has the votes in the House. That's not in question. But in the Senate, that's a different question. So we have to make sure we are not giving any president, whether it's a good actor or a bad actor, the power to unilaterally target organizations without cause and without due process, right? That is not the way the system is supposed to work. We will take more questions about this at the end. I see some in the chat. We try to answer some, but if we didn't get to your question, hang around. We are going to take more questions at the end. Robert, I want to thank you so much. Robert, if I may let you know,
Edward.
There is a reporter waiting right now to interview you about a different subject. Check your email and see if you can hop on that and if you're able to do that. We're always busy at CAIR. Alhamdulillah. That's the CAIR life. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum assalam. Chris, seeing that, hearing that, any questions that come to your mind that you want to throw out right now that I can address for you before we move on to our next topic about the broader risks facing nonprofits?
I'm actually curious to hear what else you guys have to present. I'm learning so much, even though I thought I knew a lot about this. I'm just like I feel like an idiot now in a good way. That I do have some questions, but I also feel like once you start going through your next slides, it will be answered.
Okay, excellent. Good. All right. So then let's go to the next. So now I'm going to invite on Attorney Tanya Clevenger, who is the Chief Operating Officer of CAIR National, and Lena Masri, who is the General Counsel and National Litigation Director of CAIR. These leaders are really the backbone of our organization, making sure that we are internally in order and externally fighting for the rights of all people. And so they're going to talk to you tonight about the other risks and vulnerabilities facing nonprofits and what you need to be doing to make sure your affairs are in order so no one can easily target you or undermine you and your work. So Lena, Tanya, they are going to take from here. They're going to do this section by themselves. They're going to bounce off each other. So Lena, Tanya, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Edward. It's great to be here tonight. So let me get this up.
Yes, take your time. Take your time.
There we go. All right. So I've also learned a lot tonight. I was sad with my Kahoot score, so I'll just say that out loud. Thank you so much for putting that together and making me know where my gaps are. But looking forward today to really kind of getting into the identifying of the risk vulnerabilities that are triggered by your federal and state, it triggers federal and state investigations. Also, you know, what are those, where's the line between the law, that compliance practice, and really how do you mitigate and apply those things, right? Because it's this whole world, and you're going to hear from Lena and I as we go back and forth with each other. We spend most of our days together really looking at every one of these elements, and we're here to share a little bit with you about the key ones that are triggered by this bill, so you can start learning and preparing yourself and making your nonprofit stronger. But pleasure to be here with everybody. Right. All right, so by the end of this presentation, we want to make sure you have some key takeaways. We want to make sure you understand that compliance is crucial. A lot of times we're so busy with our work, we forget to, dot our T or cross our T's and dot our I's with our compliance work. Our back end of the house has to be just as strong as our services to the communities. So when we talk about compliance, we're protecting that non-exempt status. We're trying to avoid legal challenges by having our house in order. And we're ensuring the long-term sustainability of our organization really by doing these practices. So we're going to learn through that. We're going to go back and forth. What you're going to hear a lot of times during this presentation and why we didn't put a facilitator in, you're going to hear Lena a lot of times talk about the legal standard. And then I'm going to jump in and say, here's the things you should be doing in the back of the house to make sure if anybody questions you on these legal standards, you have proof. So that's how you're going to see us work back and forth. Really quick overview. Here's the 5 main areas that we've identified are high risk, high vulnerability areas that the bill would trigger those investigations. And so when you don't have compliance in your tax status, that's going to be a lot of conversation about 990s and other IRS requirements. We're talking about those advocacy limits again. Financial management, everything again from preparing your back of your house to get ready for those audits and submit your 990s on time. State and other federal and state regulations. And one of the most important ones I think that kind of gets overlooked that creates a lot of vulnerability is those HR compliance laws, and they're changing constantly. So looking forward to covering all this with you. One of the things I want you all to know is we will have continuing education on each one of these individual topics. This is a very high level presentation for you. And what we want you to be thinking about is, do I know about this? Do I have some of these things in place? And at the end, we'll share an audit sheet for you that you can take a look at that for yourself and tell us how you're doing. All right. And Lena, I'm going to pass over to you as we kind of kick right off with prohibited activities.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for that, Tanya. Okay, so let's get started with lobbying. What's permitted? Nonprofits are allowed to engage in lobbying. However, the default test that the IRS uses is the substantial part test. There is another test that is 501H expenditure. That is if you elect for that test. I'm going to explain that in more detail later. But an example of nonpartisan lobbying that you're allowed to engage in, and this is unlimited advocacy that you're permitted to engage in, is advocating for broader access to education through legislative proposals without aligning with political parties. Political campaign activities, on the other hand, are strictly prohibited. So examples of prohibited activities would be endorsing or opposing a political candidate, distributing materials that support or oppose specific candidates or political parties, donating organizational funds, for example, to political campaigns, or using organizational resources like facilities. And so, to give you an example of that, you might not be directly involved in political activities, but if you allow another organization that is to use your facilities, for example, or your mailing lists, then you are still using organizational resources, and that is prohibited. Consequences, if you violate this, is the IRS can revoke your tax exempt status, or it can impose excise taxes for violations. So it's important to understand the difference between lobbying and political activities. Nonprofits can engage in limited lobbying to influence legislation. However, direct involvement in political campaigns is strictly off limits. So just to give you an example, it's fine to advocate, for example, for a housing bill, but it's not okay to endorse the candidate that's sponsoring that bill. Let's talk about private inurement and private benefit. Private inurement. This is another trigger area that the IRS does look into. This is prohibited. It prohibits the earnings or assets from benefiting insiders. Insiders are people like board members, executives, officers, key employees. So an example of a violation of private inurement is excessive compensation. Tanya will talk about compensation practices later. Excessive compensation would be a violation. Below market loans and personal use of organizational funds. Private benefit is a little bit different. Private benefit is about serving the public good. So your organization can't disproportionately benefit certain individuals. It has to serve the public good. So an example of an activity that would be prohibited is partnering with a for-profit company in a way that prioritizes that company over the public interest, or allowing access to resources or services exclusively for certain individuals as opposed to the broader community. Consequences, again, revocation of tax exempt status and imposition of excise taxes on responsible individuals. Okay, so let's talk about advocacy and lobbying. It's important to understand the difference between advocacy and lobbying. The reason is because advocacy does not count towards the IRS lobbying limits. Lobbying obviously does. So you want to make sure that you are properly categorizing activities on your 990s, on your reports. You're properly categorizing according to the 501c3 rules in order to protect your tax exempt status. So advocacy, we talked a little bit about this, but activities that aim to educate the public, raise awareness, or promote general social issues without directly influencing specific legislation. So for example, the characteristics that are going to help you identify advocacy: it does not reference specific legislation or ask for legislative action. It focuses on general societal goals, education, issue awareness, and it's intended to inform or engage the public without lobbying lawmakers. So advocacy, this is important. It's a core function of nonprofits. It is unrestricted, and it's essential for you to be able to advance your mission. So examples would include education initiatives, public engagement, voter education, things like that. When does advocacy become lobbying? When it involves specific legislation and a call to action. Examples of advocacy: educational advocacy, issue advocacy, community engagement, nonpartisan voter engagement. Those are all advocacy and unrestricted. Lobbying, as I mentioned, it involves activities that explicitly aim to influence the outcome of specific legislation, whether it's through direct communication or by encouraging the public to take legislative actions. So these are the characteristics to identify lobbying. The activity references specific legislation or a legislative proposal, like a bill, resolution, or a referendum. It states a position on the legislation. Do you support it or do you oppose it? And it includes a call to action, like contacting legislators. If these characteristics are there, then that is considered lobbying. There is two different types of lobbying. direct lobbying, and grassroots lobbying. Direct lobbying is you communicating directly with legislators or their staff to influence a legislative outcome, like sending a letter to a representative, posing a bill. Grassroots lobbying, on the other hand, is when you encourage the public to contact lawmakers about specific legislation. An example of that would be a social media campaign, for example. Call your senator to oppose HR 9495 would be an example.
A really good one, Lena. And actually, it's a great example to kick us off on our first kind of practice notes. So that's a lot, right? And when we're working in a nonprofit, it's hard, it's easy to kind of start getting into what we do, right? Which is constantly advocating, creating change and impact. So here's the housekeeping notes. You're gonna need to take a log. You're gonna wanna log and account for that lobbying time and expense. I'm gonna go ahead and suggest to you here that maybe this is a good time also to go into your accounting protocols and make a special code, right? That way you can track in your county, so when you do that report, maybe you special code that has lobbying efforts, advocacy efforts, how much time do we put into each, right? The records have to be detailed. I know. It's a lot of paperwork, but this is about securing our ability to create change in our communities, right? So what should we put in that detailed log? The topic, especially for lobbying, what was the specific legislation addressed? How did we go about the activity, right? Was it a call? Was it a meeting? Was it letters? Did I put it on social media? I think someone asked me live, right? So all those things, who did it? Was it a volunteer? Was it a board member? Did we have contractors participate? Did we put anything actually out into the universe? So again, those are details. I would just be creating that old school Excel sheet if you're not using, technology yet, and it just has those fields and you're giving them to your accountant so they can process your audit. Another thing you're going to hear me besides record keeping is education. This is a really important skill or task that we want to educate staff and volunteers who are doing this work. So we don't have one person actually tracking everything. Everybody who's doing the work is creating their own logs, and we're going to keep that very much moving and making sure we have details. For those of you who are asking about your social media channels or any of that work that you do political, we're actually going to cover that a little further down about some of the safeguards to make sure you're doing for your spokespersons who are trying to participate politically, but also maybe figureheads at your organizations. So hang tight for that. And I think unless there was another live question someone can point me to, we're going to keep on moving. All right, Lena, some more lobbying questions for you.
All right, so let's talk about lobbying limits. These are the tests that the IRS utilizes to determine whether or not you engaged in excessive lobbying, whether you exceeded the lobbying limits that are permitted for 501c3s to do. The default test used by the IRS is called the substantial part test. The purpose of this test is to determine if lobbying activities constitute a substantial portion of your activities. So how does this work? You evaluate lobbying in relation to the organization's overall time, effort, and resources. Time, what I mean by this is proportion of time spent by staff and volunteers on lobbying activities. Financial resources, the amount of money allocated to lobbying as compared to the budget of the entire budget of the organization. Scope, the extent to which lobbying activities impact the organization's broader operations. So as you can tell, it is ambiguous. It does give the IRS a lot of room to make subjective assessments. There is no clear percentage on what qualifies as substantial. Best practice is keep it between 5% to 15% of your total activities to avoid being scrutinized by the IRS. But still, subjective assessment leads to uncertainty. All lobbying related efforts are included, such as staff time and volunteer time, not just expenditures. If you exceed the limits of the substantial part test, or if the IRS determines that you've exceeded the limits, your organization risks fines, penalties, or loss of tax exempt status. Now, the 501H expenditure test, this is something you have to elect to do. And it is our strong advice. You should elect the 501H expenditure test, or you should make the 501H election, I should say. It is a very simple form that you file with the IRS if you are engaged in any lobbying. So this is an optional test that you can opt into. It provides clarity on how to calculate lobbying limits. The financial thresholds are clear. They're tied to annual lobbying expenditures. So organizations that are engaged in lobbying activities should make this election in order to also avoid the subjective evaluations that we were talking about that the IRS uses for the substantial part test. How does it work? Limits are calculated as a percentage of exempt purpose expenditures. So this is a sliding scale. And I am going to give you the numbers so that you can see how clear the formula is to determine what your expenditures can be for lobbying. For the first 500,000, 20% can be used for lobbying. The next 500,000, 15%. The next 500,000, 10%. And over 1.5 million is 5%. So, and the other cap, the total cap, is lobbying expenditures cannot exceed 1 million annually. So as you probably noticed, the percentages actually decrease the more exempt purpose expenditures there is. The reason is to prevent organizations from having too much influence that are larger than smaller organizations. The key advantages of the 501H election: clarity, provides a straightforward framework for compliance. It takes away ambiguity. It gives you confidence to plan lobbying activities, knowing exactly how much of your budget you can allocate. Only monetary expenditures are counted. So if you recall, I mentioned the substantial part test also includes time of staff and volunteers. Time is not included in the 501H test. Non-lobbying educational activities are also excluded. So there's less risks. It protects your tax-exempt status, and it minimizes the risk of subjectivity, as I mentioned before. The last point I want to make on this is you're no longer concerned about using volunteer services because the time is not being allocated. So to elect, you want to file the IRS form 5768. And once you elect, it's in place unless the election is revoked. Tanya, back to you.
So Lena, actually, we have a bunch of questions, and I think this is one of those important ones that we're going to definitely do some detailed training, and there are other organizations that do it as well. But the difference between advocacy and lobby seems to be something we're still asking a lot of questions about. So one of those questions, for example, and I think it goes back to the definition. Where did you go? So it is. My problem. So people are asking questions such as, what is the difference? I think they're conflating lobbying and advocacy. So someone said, can there be grassroots lobbying? And what would be the answer to that?
There is grassroots lobbying. That is encouraging the public, for example, to contact lawmakers about a specific legislation. So if you launch some sort of campaign and with an action alert and you're urging supporters to contact your representative, that is considered grassroots lobbying.
But I still have to track it, right? For my lobbying hours?
You do. Absolutely. And it, Tanya has talked a lot about this. I think the ongoing theme is you really want to make sure that you have strong documentation of all of your activities and how you're using the money and how your staff and volunteers are using their time. These are things that will be requested by the IRS or can be requested if an investigation is triggered on these issues.
Perfect. Thank you, Lena. One other question I was asked, I'll answer live. So a lot of the notes, you will have some practice note slides that you see towards the end. But right now, what you're seeing is mostly the legal standards, and you'll hear me comment on those. We'll provide some public resources shortly from CAIR on some of these best practices tied to the legal standards. So you have kind of those cheat sheet guides available to you as soon as possible.
Yep.
All right. I think we talked a little bit about this, so good to go there, Lena?
Well, I can make a few more points here on political activities. So I did say strict prohibition on participating or intervening in political campaigns on behalf or against any candidate for public office. So that is the difference actually with political activity. We were just talking about lobbying and advocacy. This applies to both direct and indirect participation. So I'm going to give you some examples to help clarify. Public statements. If you're making public statements, whether they're verbal or written, supporting or opposing a candidate, that is political activity. So endorsing a candidate is political activity. Campaign contributions, if you donate funds or in-kind services. If allowing another organization to utilize office space, that is participating indirectly with political activity. You can't use any organizational resources, so you have to be very careful when it comes to your mailing lists, staff time, or facilities being used to support or oppose candidates. Hosting partisan events, again, remember, this can either be direct, you are prohibited from directly hosting partisan events, but you also cannot indirectly support a partisan event. So the long story short, focus on issues, not candidates. That's how you ensure that you're engaged in advocacy. Consequences, loss of tax exempt status, fines or penalties for the organization and the individuals that are involved. The last note I want to make on this is make sure to monitor the social media of your organization. If you're giving staff access to social media, you want to make sure that they are trained and understand what they can and cannot say on organizational accounts.
Thank you, Lena.
Tanya,
And the last note then
go
is
for it.
on the spokespersons. I think someone asked earlier for the social media, if it's your personal account and you are a spokesperson, the words views are my own and not the organization's name. That is not 100% way to protect your organization for those of you who are executive directors or board members. But it's a starting point, and then definitely some training to make sure people are distinguishing that when speaking and engaging in their personal political activities. All right. All right, so get into some more basic practice, and then we're going to cover the law again. We'll do it backwards for you. I'll give you a brief. So with these, switching now from our prohibited activities into some of those key areas where we have issues regularly occurs. So what you're going to see here is financial management. Financial management is a huge risk and liability for our nonprofits because that is where you're going to trigger the federal government the most. What does that mean? That's that 990. To get to your 990 that Lena's going to get into next, we want to make sure you're ready for that 990 review, right? Did you have an annual audit? Do you know what an annual budget? Do you know what you're going to expend? Do you do regular financial reporting? So we always know the health, boards always know the health of the organization. They're on a recurring basis, they're monthly, and then they're definitely shared with the board no less than quarterly. What are your financial written policies and procedures? This is a definite place where audits occur. People want to know what are your processes in place for spending limits, for reimbursements, tax compliance on sales and tax obligations. Who's approving those things, right? Those financial controls internally. Is the need to approve everything? Are you so large as an organization now that you have your own CPA on staff? What type of oversight is that person providing and to who? This is an area where, again, we would get into deep discussion regarding protocols, but just know these key things, like as you're thinking about and you're looking at this slide, Are you doing these things? Is your annual practice include these things? And what they're all going to lead to is that 990 and a lot of essential reporting that goes into that 990. Lena.
Okay, so the 990, we're talking about the annual returns that every 501c3 is required to file. What I want to do is focus on the common pitfalls when you're filing this Form 990 that can trigger IRS investigations. So first, inaccurate financial reporting. So misreporting expenses or revenue, it can signal that there's lack of oversight, of financial oversight, and it can trigger scrutiny. So an example of this, misclassifying expenses as programmatic instead of administrative to make it look like your organization is more efficient than it actually is. That is a trigger. Incomplete or missing sections, failing to answer all of the questions. So you want to go through the 990 and make sure that every single question has been answered. There are bigger, more significant omissions than others. Like, for example, Schedule B. This is the schedule of contributors where you have to disclose significant contributions. If you omit Schedule B, that can trigger an investigation by the IRS. Discrepancies between the Form 990 and your financial statements. So if the data doesn't match between your Form 990, your audited financials, that can raise a red flag. Failing to report compensation properly. So you are required to disclose compensation for key executives, including bonuses and deferred benefits. If you don't make these disclosures, it can lead to concerns of private inurement and unreasonable compensation. Compensation discrepancies. What I mean by this is paying excessive salaries without justification. And again, Tanya will talk about this a little bit later, but excessive salaries can also trigger an audit for potential inurement violations. Excessive administrative costs. So if a high percentage of your spending is on administrative or fundraising activities as compared to programs, that can also trigger an investigation. So an example, I would say spending more than 40% of revenue on administrative expenses, that can lead donors and watchdog groups to question your efficiency, and it really just takes one complaint to trigger an investigation. Inadequate public support. So as a 501c3, and this is Schedule A, as a 501c3, you are required to derive at least 33 1/3% of support from public sources over rolling 5-year period. So individual donors and the government agencies, you have to pass the public support test or you can lose your tax exempt status. Sudden changes in financial data. So if there's significant changes from year to year in your revenue, expenses, program activities, and there's no explanation for it, like a sudden spike in donations, and it's not clear how those funds were used, that can also trigger an investigation. Unreported transactions with insiders. We've talked about this a little bit before, but if you're making loans, grants, transactions, things like that with board members or officers, key executives, and you're not properly disclosing these things, then that can lead to accusations of conflict of interest and private inurement. Foreign activities are required to be disclosed on Schedule F. If you're operating and sending funds overseas without clearly documenting exactly how those funds are being used, that can also trigger an investigation. So for example, if there is a grant that you are giving to an organization that's a foreign organization, you need to make sure that you're providing that documentation. Errors in Schedule B. So I talked about this just briefly. This is where you're providing information about contributions. You are required to disclose large donors. If you misreport donor amounts, it can result in penalties. $5,000, anything over that must be disclosed. And large donors are also required to be disclosed. if their total contributions exceed 2% of the organization's total contributions. And finally, I want to flag failure to file Form 990. Of course, this can also trigger an investigation, but if you fail to file for 3 consecutive years, it does lead to automatic revocation of your tax-exempt status. Tanya, back to you.
Yep, I'm going to answer a couple put a couple questions out there, Lena, for both of us to answer. One of them pertained to, again, kind of this operational versus service cost that a nonprofit has to report, right? So when it comes, one person said, and this happens a lot for service-oriented nonprofits, most of your budget is likely salaries. And you know what I'll comment on real quick is that's not unusual. Where a lot of people tend to overlook is what is a salary for an operational purpose, such as someone who's an accountant or human resources, right? Those are all pure house, back of housework versus staffing that you need to provide the services. And sometimes there's a mix because we're small nonprofits. But from the 990, you're going to make those disclosures Lena's talked about those high salaries. And that's what they're going to look at they're auditing, right? They're looking at who those positions are and what they do. If you get into an audit situation of the value of your services versus having a high operation overhead cost. Lena, anything you want to add to that one?
No, that was pretty comprehensive.
Okay. All right. So more to that when we get to HR practices and what is a small nonprofit. Well, I think that definition varies widely. I'm not sure if there's a legal definition, Lena, but for my purposes, when I think about small nonprofits, I'm thinking about those of us that wear about 10 hats a day. Sometimes I'm out here providing legal services. Sometimes Lena's a legal director, providing litigation, and CAIR is actually supporting the community by making sure you're protected, versus I'm over here actually looking at data that makes me quite bored on the 990. So those are if I'm wearing too many hats, I'm going to start calling us a small nonprofit, versus those that have specialized skills and their budgets are now getting over that million, 5 million, 10 million. All right. Let's keep on moving then. All right. So part of that 990, especially once you get over $1 million, you're going to have to start doing audits. They're required and it's best practice, and you're going to get dinged and your grantors are going to stop giving you money. If you've had really great luck with grantors giving you money, if you get over $1 million and you haven't started your audits, you're going to run into some problems and that money is going to disappear. So why do we cover this here with the 990 and fiscal relationships and practices? Everything's got to be in writing. The day of the handshake, and my father used to love the handshake, it is gone. It is days gone. And we really need to do a good job at documenting our relationships, especially when they're financial in nature. Your auditors on the 990, when they're looking at that, they're going to ask, what is the nature of this contract? Who is this vendor? So again, these are important contracts to put in writing, and every one of them needs to be scrutinized per those laws and regulations Lena's kind of been talking about, and we're going to continue talking about. And they have to be aligned to our mission, right? We can't just have random contracts that have nothing to do with our work. Those can get you in trouble too, right, Lena?
Yeah, mission alignment. So this is a big one that a lot of organizations get dinged on. Remember, your IRS determination letter, the letter that is giving you your tax exempt status. I will talk about it a little bit later, but you've made a representation to the IRS of what your mission is. And if you conduct activities outside the scope of your mission, that can raise red flags with the IRS, but also with donors and other stakeholders like grantors. Misaligned activities, meaning activities that you're conducting that are outside of the scope of your mission, they can actually jeopardize your tax exempt status because it suggests that you are not operating primarily for a charitable purpose. So it is very important when you have contracts, grants, any type of partnerships, funding opportunities, all of these things, you have to evaluate every one of them to make sure that they do actually reinforce your mission and don't detract from your mission. So That is important. You want to make sure you are reviewing everything. You should also clarify directly in agreements what the purpose of the agreement is, the purpose being supporting your mission. You should also make sure agreements also define the scope of activities that are in the agreement to fall within the scope of your mission and tax exempt purposes.
Thank you, Lena. We've already covered this. I just want to highlight one last time. You should have key organizational documents that I believe Lena mentioned earlier. If not, we can quickly cover them. We need to have them in a centralized location where they're easily accessed by your key leadership, board members, and most importantly, your accountants, just to make sure you're in compliance with those bylaws. It's really important to keep these records and have a centralized system for them. Please don't go looking for them once asked. Lena, anything else on that?
I have a few things to say. You definitely want to make sure you have access to those records. If there's an audit or inquiry or an investigation, or hopefully this doesn't happen, but in an absolute worst case scenario, there could be a raid. And so you want to make sure your board members also know where to access these key organizational documents that I'm about to go through. The first, articles of incorporation. This is what establishes your organization as a legal entity, and it specifies your charitable purpose. You want to make sure that the purpose clause in the articles reflect your mission that we were talking about earlier, and that it satisfies the requirements for the IRS. The IRS determination letter. This is the letter I mentioned briefly. It is proof for donors and grant applications, grantors, of your tax exempt status. So you want to make sure you keep your determination letter, but also any updates or correspondences that you have with the IRS. Your bylaws. Your bylaws outline your governance structure and decision-making processes. There's provisions for board compositions, for officer roles, for meeting procedures. All of these things should be defined in your bylaws, and you should have your bylaws handy. You're required to have a conflict of interest policy. The IRS requires this. It defines how conflicts are identified and managed to make sure that decisions are being made in the best interest of the organization and not another entity or another individual. Financial policies for managing funds, approving budgets, conducting audits, procedures for distinguishing between restricted and unrestricted funds, meaning earmarked funds. These are also policies that you are required to have. You want to make sure these are accessible. And a last point I want to make here is a very common oversight is outdated bylaws or mission statements that don't reflect your current activities. This can lead to compliance issues.
Thank you, Lena. And thank you all of us for bearing with us. A lot of great information I know you want. And so we will be getting you those information, hopefully some resources to help you remember all this stuff soon.
Yes, it is a lot of information. Okay, let's talk about international relations. This is also important, especially in the context of the Nonprofit Killer Bill. International relations with donors and partners must be vetted. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But vetting is the first step. It is your most vital first step to ensure that your organization doesn't inadvertently engage with sanctioned or terrorism designated entities or individuals. So I'm going to kind of just identify what the key practice points are. One, you want to make sure that you're screening your donors, your partners, and your beneficiaries against government watch lists like the OFAC, Specially Designated Nationals list. You want to maintain detailed documentation for all of your transactions, the purpose of your funds, the recipient's information, evidence that the funds were used properly. That should all be documented. You want to conduct due diligence on the partner as well. You want to verify, for example, their legal registration, their financial stability, and their reputation. You want to formalize these relationships, as Tanya was saying, in writing, written agreements. They must be written that specify the purpose of the funds and confirm compliance with both US and international laws. You want to also make sure that you are continually monitoring the international funding and making sure that it is compliant to protect your organization from financial risk. You want to regularly audit your international programs to resolve or identify any compliance issues. And you want to make sure that you're meeting your reporting requirements. Sanctions. I want to briefly touch on sanctions and due diligence requirements. These are administered by U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, that I mentioned a little bit ago. Sanctions vary in scope and focus. I am going to just quickly mention the countries that are probably of interest to this group: Afghanistan, Burma, Iran, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. You want to make sure that you are conducting your due diligence, especially in these areas that are considered high risk, obviously, because of sanctions. Any transactions, activities, sometimes you are required to get specific authorization from OFAC. So make sure that you are looking into that. Sanctions laws are constantly changing. So you always want to keep checking and checking and checking it again to make sure that you are compliant with current sanctions. You want to make sure you're screening everybody against the OFAC list, check for current information. Agreements with partners should include clear guidelines on how they're using funds, and you want to keep detailed records of all of this. So just finally, red flags that can trigger investigations. If proposals for use of funds are too vague, this can trigger an investigation. Large cash donations and partnerships in countries under sanctions.
Thank you, Lena. And all these kind of requirements that Lena gave around vetting, again, best practices, don't just do that with the ones you're concerned about. Go ahead and gain the practice of doing it with everybody, and you'll kind of be on the safer side of things. All right, so we're going to be moving on to state by state and registration licensing requirements. This is definitely where people get themselves in some amount of trouble.
Oh, yes, definitely. This can also trigger investigations. So it is important to understand and pay attention to state and local laws as well. These are critical for protecting your organization from legal exposure, especially in the current climate. So, one, I'm going to start with registration requirements. Most states, 41 states actually, require nonprofits to register before you're soliciting any donations from the residents of their state. To maintain transparency, to build donor trust, you have to provide financial information, things like that. The registration also is, you have to renew it every year. You have to file annual renewals in order to continue soliciting donations, to operate programs, or conduct any fundraising activities. If you don't comply, there could be fines or civil penalties. There could be cease and desist orders that prohibit you from conducting any fundraising, or your license to solicit funds can be either suspended or revoked. And of course, we have seen this before, is that technicalities like not registering in a state can also trigger an investigation by the state. It can be used as a pretext to investigate other issues like material support. Each state has its own variation, so you want to be paying attention. Florida and New York, for example, they require certain disclaimers on fundraising materials. California requires reporting on significant financial transactions. So you want to pay attention to your particular state as well. A lot of states, but not all of them, require you to disclose any contracts that you have with professional fundraisers. Some states even require you to give that contract to the state. You have to file it with the state so that it is accessible to donors and they can see how much money you're spending on fundraising and what those terms look like. So my recommendation is right now, you want to make sure that you go through all of your solicitation materials and make sure that they are actually compliant. This is a very important area for you to make sure that you've dotted your I's and you've crossed your T's. Complaints from donors, watchdog groups, this is enough also to trigger an investigation. Missing, incomplete filings, similar to the 990, or if there are discrepancies between your filing with the state and your filing on your 990. So you want to make sure you're also reviewing your registration status in the states where you are required to register. So if you're engaged in online fundraising, for example, that really can expose you to all 41 states. Each state has its own laws, so you're going to want to check that, but more likely than not, and really it's better to be safe. If you are a multi-state organization, then you want to make sure that you are properly registered and that you have your solicitation license with every state that you are soliciting funds in.
So that's a lot. If any of you wanted to sit down and have a conversation just about all of the different laws that apply to your state, we'd be here all night, and I'm sure nobody wants to do that. There is a link here, and David's going to drop it into the chat for all of you. It's a great public website by a law firm that really puts together all the statutes, all the laws for each state you're in. I highly recommend, especially for you multi-state companies, and I'll explain what that is in just a second. Go ahead and kind of favorite that, add it to your tabs, make that somewhere you visit very regularly. Best practice tip I can give you, because it's too much. It's too much to try to remember it all off the top of your head. Other really, I just lost my train of thought entirely, which is fine. We'll keep on moving, but please earmark that. And we will get back to, I think it was a question. All right, Lena, keep us moving.
And
The next
Lena,
one is
Tanya, I just want to make sure you are seeing, we got a few interesting questions about foreign donors, non-US donors. So I know we're short on time, so if we can't get to that tonight, but that seems an interesting question, is should we be screening all of their non-US donors if they're donating online, questions like that.
That's a great question. Absolutely, especially if they're coming from high-risk regions and countries that that I listed that have sanctions.
And the other thing about doing that screening, especially if you're seeing high numbers with international donors, there's also a huge distinction between an individual international donor and a country who is providing aid to your organization. So please, if you're getting that, definitely speak to a lawyer about that information, right? Because those are two distinguishable facts when we think about international dollars.
One other point that I want to add here, consider adopting an anti-terrorism policy, because if you are investigated, if an investigation is actually triggered, you want to be able to show that you've adopted this policy, and this policy requires the vetting of partners and donors and contracts. All of these things can be written out in the policy. Of course, anything that we've been talking about, you can always reach out to us if you have any questions or need support in doing that. But it'll be useful for your defense.
100%. And that brings me to what we were talking about earlier, that I did remember multi-state. When I say you're a multi-state organization, or Lena says that, what we mean is not that you literally have a physical office somewhere, but are you providing services and have contacts in those areas, right? If you're doing that, when your contact lists are generated, guaranteed, you're going to hit those solicitation licenses. So think about what you're doing business. I know someone asked for some additional steps. Look at your contacts. Where are they coming from? Look at your donors. Where are they coming from? If you're all over the place about where your funding's coming, not just internationally, but statewide, that's probably a time to maybe even get the assistance, not just of general counsel. There's actually a number of organizations that do provide registration assistance, whether that is for your solicitation licenses, your business license, occupational licenses, all kinds of fun stuff out there. There are business entities that help you stay on track of that if you don't have in-house general counsel or an accounting department. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your donor list. All right, donors, that brings us straight here. Tons of regulation. We covered the key one, solicitation license and solicitation licenses. If you're using professional fundraisers, there's key things you need to make sure that they are using, that they have licenses for the work that they're doing. This is where we see so many issues, right? You really want to do an audit of how are you raising funds? Are you registered where you need to be registered? And is anybody who's doing that for you having additional legal requirements? So I'll let you, we'll come back to that. Donor disclosures. When you're on your website, when you're taking money, if you have promises, pledges, all of those things need to be super clear to your donors, how their funds are going to be used. Really important thing for our Muslim brothers and sister organizations here, zakat funds, you will be flagged for it. You need to have a policy that is clear and honest, right, about how you're taking zakat funds. How are those zakat funds being accounted for and spent? Really important donor disclosure. What else do we have? Online fundraising, somebody asked about this as well. Yes, online fundraising may trigger other state requirements depending on how you are doing, depending on your reach. So again, there's that state and tax exempt statuses. If you're doing, let's say it's not online, it's in person, you may not have a state tax exempt license. So you may have to pay those local venue taxes. So keep that in mind when you're going around doing different activities. You're going to trigger those requirements. You need to look at them as you plan your online fundraisers or your in-person ones, depending on the location in which you're marketing to. And just a quick note on privacy laws. This is a huge legal area. I'm not even going to make poor Lena go into it. We would definitely take a long time, but the laws are changing consistently because of the virtual world we live in. There's tons of requirements about your websites, how you share data, those donor databases that you have. It is an area where you can inadvertently do something that violates someone's privacy rights, and you don't want to find yourself in that situation. Lena, anything here?
You also want to make sure you're not selling data. It's always important to make sure you're getting consent and before you sell data. There are a lot of laws that get implicated. Different states have different privacy laws, so it's important to consult with an attorney that's actually specialized in privacy if you want to do something like that.
You know, there's actually a really great question about donations and solicitation. Someone said, what if I get a $10? They actually said, even if the donation is $10, that depends on how many $10 donations you got. But I'll turn that over to Lena for the legal answer to that.
To have the solicitation laws to apply. So you are the places that you need to make sure that you are registering and getting solicitation licenses, a state where you are intentionally either operating or soliciting funds. But I mentioned online fundraising. So if your email blasts, for example, include a donate button, that's going nationwide. So all 41 states are being implicated. You can actually, but of course you want to check with your state to make sure, but there are some states that allow you to put disclosures or disclaimers on your email that says specifically, I am not, or this email is not soliciting funds from residents in New York, for example. You can do things like that so you can check, but in general, as long as you have an intention to solicit, not just getting a donation that was voluntarily given to you.
Thank you, Lena. All right, so we're going to keep us moving. This is really, again, about that evidence train that we were talking about. The governance, the compliance, what do you need to have? So I'm going to quickly go through these. So again, we talked about those governance documents Lena referenced above. You want to make sure you have them again in a secure place. Those are everything from your board minutes that you should be having a regular cadence of meetings about. And those minutes are high level, not detailed, not verbatim. They're the issue at hand in agenda and the answer you arrive to or next step, period, right? These are about documenting what has happened, not a detailed deposition style. All right. Conflict of interest, we talked about a little bit ahead. Again, that's an important key policy. Compensation records, Lena's was talking about. So again, compensation, one of those key triggers. There's a lot of rules in nonprofits about how much people can get paid. This includes your bonuses structures. They cannot be willy-nilly bonus structures. They have to actually fit within the IRS code of what is allowed, right? And that is reasonable compensation. Reasonable is determined by your staff size, your budget size, and what other market players are giving. So if you have this $500,000 salary and you're $1 million organization, you got some answers. You got some questions you got to answer, okay? So we want to make sure those records specifically are well maintained and clear. Board governance. So again, here's where we're talking about when are we meeting with board members? How accurately are our minutes? Did we meet quorum? Right? That's that bylaws. Adhering to your bylaws is a huge process within all your board meetings and governance. This is the thing we just went kind of into the compliance documentation. That's your registration, solicitation, license, permits. Again, that's that long list. We're not going to cover again on those state specific pieces, but again, you want to make sure you have it. And then legal disclosures. We kind of briefly touched on this on the 990, but I want to emphasize it here. Your board and your auditors, if you have one, have to be made aware of lawsuits, pending lawsuits that affect either operations or finances. These are not things that you can keep internally to staff, but you have to disclose it. Like we see this a lot in those conflict issues come up. Someone's going to say, oh, I think we have this employee who's about to sue us. Those words should trigger an alarm bell. You need to have that on your next meeting. And you're going to say, how do we document that we did that? That's what your board meeting minutes are all about. Okay, so please remember to make these disclosures. It will run the full gamut all the way to the 990 when you get there and into your audits. So this is the place in which you do it. All right. All right, some more best practice piece. I'm going to take a cue from our team since we still have 155 people. We're going to get into some of the triggers now when it comes to human resources. So I'm going to again try to go offline as much as I can so we can keep moving. What I want you to take away from this slide, you see keywords on here. These are your payroll taxes, your unemployment taxes, employee benefits, especially things like retirement plans, your payroll reports that have to be submitted. That's a 941, right? These are due quarterly. My practice tip here, without getting into a long lecture on each one of these subjects, is if you don't know what this is, if you don't know that you have a filing requirement, please reach out. This is a great place to reach out and get some help from CAIR or someone you trust about these issues specifically. You have to make these filings. They deal with getting you in trouble and triggering investigations on the federal and state level. Quick note about SUTA. Again, this is for multi-state employers here on the call. You have requirements per state. The laws are changing heavily in unemployment law about where you register your employees to receive that if in case they become unemployed. Please be careful that you understand, again, if you have employees that are remote, you have to possibly, at this point, based on changing laws, actually register for SUTA in those areas. So again, SUTA is your unemployment tax. All right. Do I have any questions on this, Lena?
No.
All right, I'm going to keep us moving. All right, more human resources. Number one issue outside of finances, that's the first thing that everybody gets triggered on. Something happened with your 990, something happened with those state solicitation filings, all of a sudden you're in trouble. The third issue, and Lena, you can disagree with me publicly, and I agree, and that's fine. I doubt you'll meet the challenge. Employees. Having compliance over our staff, establishing good practices is not only a best practice, but very important piece of compliance. So to make sure we're proving our compliance with those state laws, again, sorry to tell you this, each state has their very own employment requirements. If you are practicing in numerous areas, first thing I'm going to tell you, hire an HR professional or a company who can do this for you. Tons and tons of pitfalls. You make sure you're having your policies in writing. Going back and forth and not following the same process for everybody is a quick way to get you triggered into our EEO, employment discrimination laws in the United States. Job descriptions. This is a great way to also get in trouble with someone not knowing what they're actually responsible for. Did we talk about those spokespersons, right? Do they actually know that they're spokespersons so that you can hold them accountable if they say something that hurts your organization? Please make sure you're doing detailed job descriptions. Performance. Performance isn't just about raises, okay? Performance evaluations are a key part of your relationship with your employee to make sure, one, that you guys are on the same page about things, but also, again, worst case scenario, if you have someone who's not doing what they need to be doing, and you don't have a record of that, you don't have a record of what you've done to help them succeed at their work, this is going to create that liability on those EEO laws. And training. Cannot overemphasize how important it is. Some training is for professional development. The ones that are going to get you in trouble are your HR harassment, non-harassment training, your retaliation trainings, bullying in the workplace, your DEI trainings. So those are essential. All right. Last one, personnel files. This is one of those really key employment records that needs to be detailed. This is probably the number one request for discovery on litigation of any sort. Please keep a complete personnel file that should include their hiring dockets that are required by the IRS, that should include any pay history changes. So please have a very detailed record. And it's a little further down, so I'm just going to say you should also have a retention policy so that you automatically are not keeping documents forever and more. So please hold on to those. I'm going to flash these up here really quick. These are really important policies that should be in your handbook. I'm going to mention them quickly and then keep on moving. Employment and hiring policies. That's everything from recruitment to employment opportunity laws to fair hiring practices, wage and hours. You can get quickly in trouble by the Department of Labor if you're not tracking overtime. Conduct, what is permissible, not permissible behaviors in your workplace. Leave, what are people entitled to? This one I'm going to flag is super important. Your state laws have specific manners in which you must pay out vacation. If you are offering it, it's in your handbook, you may be required to pay out your vacation leave. This is another one to flag depending on your state. Health and safety, again, making sure people are working in environments. Obviously, most of us learned a lot about this during COVID. Technology, one of the biggest vulnerabilities we have to all of our data, which would then expose you to all these liabilities we're talking about. Please make sure you have the correct tech and you have the right security in place. Volunteers cannot be told everything they have to do and be treated like an employee. If they are, you may be triggering some laws there that'll cause some issues. And we talked briefly about performance management. Lena, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. So I'm going to quickly wrap us up into some quick best practices in general. Be proactive about what you're doing. Know what you're doing. Ensure that you are constantly learning, growing, and developing to safeguard yourselves, and communicate. Probably I won't be that generous. 75% of your problems was probably someone said something in the wrong tone or in the wrong way and left out a key fact, especially when it comes to your leadership and your board. This has to be clear, determine the right channels in which you're communicating with each other and your donors. And here we are building this best foundation for your nonprofit, our nonprofits, to keep our community safe and to keep ensuring that we're thriving. So thank you all very, very much for that. And again, we'll have many cheat sheets for you. We'll have a number of additional trainings coming up soon, so please stand by. And if you need us, this slide, this is how you get to Lena. This is how you get to me for all general questions. info@cair.com or gc@cair.com.
Thank you, Tanya and Lena. You can bring me back on screen now, our producer. So that was a lot, and it was important stuff, which is why we dedicated the time to doing that. And so I want to thank Lena and Tani. Obviously, if there were questions that you wanted to ask that we didn't get to, if there's more detail, you can leave that screen up for a moment. Please reach out to us so that we can follow up with those specific questions. There are some in the chat that we didn't get to. This is a complicated area of law to some extent, and so we are happy to help like-minded organizations if we can, inshallah. Last thing I want to note is that, as you heard today, there are various risks and vulnerabilities that nonprofits face. There are potholes we have to avoid. But these are all solvable issues, right? It just takes some discipline. It takes making an effort to make sure you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's. And it's very important that we do that, especially this year. Look, we have no idea what is going to be coming down from this White House, but we want to make sure we are prepared. No matter who is in the White House, we should all be upholding the law, and we should all be following best practices and making sure our nonprofits are strong and resilient and not subject to abuse by the government. At CAIR, our responsibility is to defend the American Muslim community, to defend your civil rights. And we also want to make sure that our organizations, especially those doing work related to the Muslim community, are strong and protected. I want to invite back on Chris from LaunchGood, if he's still here, to share with us some closing remarks, if he would like, or Miriam, if either of you are here. And all of you, again, thank you for joining us this evening. We've certainly appreciated your time and your patience being with us for so long. And I want to say thanks to LaunchGood for doing this with us. Chris, please, any final remarks or thoughts you want to share?
Well, of course, I want to thank you guys. This was awesome. Very informational. You can tell, I mean, this went over probably like an hour more than we thought, but
Yes.
still over 100 people are on the call. That's amazing. And it speaks to how much need there is for information. I just really want to say thank you. Great job. Let's keep it going, guys. This is just the start of a new administration that seems hell-bent on crushing anyone that's standing up for Palestine. It was great to see we were able to sway so many Democrats away from this bill, but I don't think we were able to sway a single Republican, were we?
No, not one.
Not one. Not one. That's scary, right? Like it's just like they're not even listening to our concerns, at least on the first round. But if we stand united and stand together, I do believe we have a chance to remain strong, inshallah, together as a community, and keep up our work and keep up our advocacy for Palestine, inshallah.
Absolutely. And finally, we'll note that this seminar is just the first kind of a launch. We do plan to do more of this. Again, there's so much information, stuff we didn't even get to. So we will do more of these events later in the year, inshallah, as we have a better understanding of what the situation is. Once we kind of see what the other threats are, what the risks are, we'll be doing more of this, inshallah. So stay tuned. We've got your contact information. We'll reach out to you all to make sure that you have the opportunity to join us for those events, inshallah. As always, if you experience any discrimination, bigotry, anything you're worried about, go to cair.com/report, and our team will get in touch with you, inshallah. Thank you again to LaunchGood. Thank you to Miriam. Thank you to Lena,
Thank
Tanya,
you.
Robert, Nihad, everyone who worked on this behind the scenes in front of the camera, Geraldine, Paula, everyone, thank you so much. And to our ASL interpreters, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you and the work that you do. And everyone have a great night, inshallah, and we'll talk soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Recording stopped.